In this video, we will be discussing dyslexia and dysgraphia. First, we will focus on dyslexia, which means faulty reading. There are two main subgroups of dyslexia. First, there is acquired dyslexias, which are those that are caused by damage to the brain of people who already know how to read. And then there's developmental dyslexias, which refer to the reading difficulties that become apparent when children are learning how to read. Now, acquired dyslexia also has subgroups within itself, and we will be discussing three of them: surface, phonological, and direct dyslexia. Surface dyslexia is a reading disorder in which a person can read words phonetically but has difficulty reading irregularly spelled words. That is because they can't recognize whole words, they actually have to sound them out. So people with this disorder will make mistakes because of the visual appearance of the words and because they try to follow regular pronunciation rules rather than the meaning.
With words like glass or chin, they have no problem. The problem comes with words that have irregular spelling. So for example, I am actually a native Spanish speaker and English is my second language. So when I was reading the textbook, it said that it would be difficult for people with dyslexia to read the words so, pint, and yacht. And when I initially read them in my head, I read them as su, pint, and yacht, which I didn't even realize my mistake until I read the next sentence, which was... And that is why English is such a hard language for people with surface dyslexia, because it is an irregular language, as opposed to, for example, Spanish, where the sounds are always the same in all words, and sounding each and every word in an entire book would still have someone never mispronounce one, because it's a phonetic language. So because people with surface dyslexia cannot recognize whole words by their appearance, they must, in effect, listen to their own pronunciation to understand what they're reading. So then another problem comes when they read homophones. For example, if they read the word pear with no context in the word, they might think, well, it could be two of a kind, or it could be the fruit, so here's a pair of pears. Or they can be pear as in trimming, so they wouldn't know what the word means because the spelling of it means nothing to them, only the sound has an actual meaning. Here is a chart of what it will look like for people that do not have dyslexia and for people who do have, in this case, surface dyslexia. And essentially the whole word reading, the whole word recognition is not there, it's not working. So the only way they have, the only path they have left is this one, which is recognize a letter, sound it phonetically, and then be able to say the word out loud. So most of us have both systems. We can either sound out a word or we can recognize the word as a whole. Phonological reading involves the Broca's area, which is the area that's necessary to articulate the word. So when we are reading a word to ourselves, what we're actually doing is feeling ourselves pronounce the word. We're not actually hearing it in our head. So many studies have found that it's actually damage to the left fusiform gyrus, which is known as the visual word form area, is what produces the surface dyslexia. This is a region that would also be involved in the perception of faces and other shapes.
Next is phonological dyslexia, which is also a reading disorder, but it's the opposite of surface dyslexia. With this disorder, a person can read familiar words but has difficulty reading unfamiliar words or pronounceable non-words. That is because they're only able to recognize whole words and not able to sound them out.
Here's a chart that shows how people with phonological dyslexia would read, similarly to the way that with surface dyslexia they would not have the whole word recognition system working. For people with phonological dyslexia, they don't have the phonetic coding part of it working, so they can only recognize the words that they already know because they see the word and they recognize what it is. They're not able to sound it out. So another thing with phonological dyslexia is that they can only read the words that they learned before the brain damage occurred. So for example, if they were to read a pronounceable non-word, for example, like a purd is not an actual word, but we could sound it out and say it. Since they're not able to sound out words and they've never seen that word because it's not real, they wouldn't be able to read that specific word. Now, another thing is that they can be fluent readers if they had an extensive fluent vocabulary when the damage occurred. So it actually takes an experienced reader the same amount to read a 3-letter word than it takes them to read a 6-letter word. So that means the whole word reading process does not have to identify the letters one at a time. Now, another sign of phonological dyslexia is misreading a word. For example, do they read except and then they say expect. So that is another thing that happens with phonological dyslexia, because the visual word form area of the left hemisphere is able to recognize a word as long as it resembles another one. So, like I said, it is a visual word form area that allows for a patient with phonological dyslexia to recognize a word when they see it, but it is a deficit on the pterygoparietal cortex communication with the inferior frontal cortex that actually causes them to not be able to sound out a word.
Direct dyslexia is a language disorder that's caused by brain damage, in which a person can read words out loud, but they don't understand the words. So they lose the ability to communicate verbally, their speech turns meaningless, and they have no comprehension about what other people are saying, but they're still able to read a word, say the word out loud, even though they don't know what it means. Direct dyslexia can be present in two different ways. It can resemble phonological dyslexia, where they can read words they're familiar with, but not words that are unreal or unknown, and some can sound out the words like surface dyslexia, but the overall idea is that in either scenario, can they comprehend the words that they are reading. Developmental dyslexias appear to have a genetic component. Some children have great difficulty learning how to read and never will actually become fluent readers, even though they're otherwise intelligent.
With developmental dyslexia, there are usually other deficits in language, for example, phonological awareness, which means they can blend or rearrange sounds. So they wouldn't be able to understand that if you take the S from sand, you'd be left with the word and. Now, some of the issues with this is that I actually exhibit firsthand are spelling errors or wrong arrangement or omission of letters. So here's a snippet of the dialogue that I created to do this video, and as you can see, I have most of my mistakes are not necessarily spelling, but I tend to miss words, which I actually do a lot when I write or when I type regardless. I make a lot of these mistakes. Usually easier when I'm using the computer because I can just, the computer will tell me it's wrong and I can fix it. Just wanted to show you kind of the way it would look like. Now we know that developmental dyslexia has some type of genetic component to it because the concordance rate of monozygotic twins, which means twins that come from one ovulated egg, ranges from 84% to 100%. As well as we have found that linkage studies showed us that the chromosomes 1, 3, 6, and 15 may actually contain genes that are responsible for the different components of the disorder. Now, one last thing I want to leave with this is that since written language is such a recent invention, we don't have any areas of the brain that are specifically or uniquely dedicated to the interpretation of written language. It is only just some parts that have adapted to help us understand language or produce language.
They actually did a study where they compared dyslexics that are English speakers, which is an irregular language, and Italian speakers, which is a regular language, and they found out that both groups have similar brain functioning when they evaluated them, but it was harder to find Italian speakers who were dyslexic, and their symptoms were also less severe. The reason being that English has 40 sounds that can be spelled in up to 1,120 different ways, while Italian has 25 different sounds that can be spelled in only 33 combinations. For example, consider cough, rough, bow, and through. All they sound different, even though they're spelled similarly, because English doesn't have a phonetic rule. Now I am going to discuss dysgraphias, which are difficulty reading. First, orthographic dysgraphia is a writing disorder in which a person can spell regularly spelled words, but not irregularly spelled ones. So a patient with this disorder is kind of similar to those that have surface dyslexia. They can only sound out words, therefore they can only spell those with regular spelling. Now, since they're able to sound out words, they can also write non-words that are pronounceable. With the regular words like so, yacht, and busy, they might write it this way. Next, we have phonological dysgraphia. This is a writing disorder that is the opposite of orthographic dysgraphia, and it's kind of similar to phonological dyslexia. People with this disorder cannot sound out words. They can only write words that they have previously seen, so they can actually visualize them and write them down. Orthographic dysgraphias are caused by damage to the visual word form area on the base of the temporal lobe, while phonological dysgraphia appears to be caused by damage to the regions of the brain involved in phonological processing and articulation, such as damage to the Broca's area, the ventral precentral gyrus, and the insula. These scans show the damage and the way it looks on people who have dysgraphias. So the scans show the overlap in deletions of patients with phonological dysgraphia and with orthographic dysgraphia, respectively. Where there is red, there is the most overlap, and where there is purple, there is the least overlap. So what this shows is that there's still some overlap in the areas that help with controlling the whole word reading, the same way they help with phonetic sounding out words. I actually chose this topic as my first choice because I have dyslexia and I wanted to learn more about it. So the additional source, I wanted it to be something regarding treatment options for people with dyslexia. An article posted on the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that phonics intervention treatment, that is a method of teaching people to read by correlating sounds with letters or groups of letters, was effective to help people with reading but not spelling or arithmetic. However, they noted that there is often a comorbidity of dyslexia with ADHD, which of course I'll have because my brain can't do anything right. So they saw that the results of giving ADHD medications, specifically methylphenidate, I think that's how it's pronounced, and they realized that it made an impact on arithmetic but not in reading, which could lead to the conclusion that there needs to be a complete and rounded approach to helping those with dyslexia, including training neural phenome awareness and structured book reading to best aid those that are struggling with this disorder. The sources for this video are the book and a peer-reviewed article I found on the ASU library about dyslexia.
Ya, gracias, niñas.